Alina vanished on a Tuesday. Emily, was the last person to see her alive, and the first to discover the truth no one else dared to face. What started as a missing persons case in our quiet coastal town unraveled into something far darker. Hidden surveillance, a box buried beneath our floorboards, and a faceless man watching from the shadows. Before I became a wife, I became a witness, and nearly a victim. This is the chapter of my life I was never supposed to tell. Before marriage, my life was ordinary, unremarkable in every way. I lived in a quiet coastal town where the biggest excitement was a new cafe opening or the annual street fair. I worked part-time at a cozy independent bookstore, stacked dusty paperbacks, and dreamed about one day moving to the city for grad school. It was a peaceful life, and I thought I had everything under control. But everything changed the day my roommate, Alina, went missing. Alina and I had shared the apartment for a little over a year. She was everything I wasn't. Outgoing, athletic, always up before sunrise for her morning run. People in town adored her. She was the kind of person others gravitated to. We weren't best friends, but we got along. Our routines blended quietly into each other's lives, until one morning when I woke up to silence. It wasn't unusual for her to leave early. She always jogged the same trail along the cliffs just outside town, then stopped for coffee before heading home. But by lunchtime, I started to feel uneasy. She hadn't returned. Her phone wasn't ringing. By evening, I'd called her parents and the police. I told myself maybe she'd met someone, maybe she'd lost track of time. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The police searched the cliffs where she usually ran. They found her phone lying on the grass near the edge, screen cracked, music still playing through her wireless earbuds. The area was roped off and divers combed the waters below, but no body surfaced. No clothing, no personal items, nothing. It was like she'd simply vanished into the sea. The town was in shock. Vigils were held, posters were put up, but weeks passed and the search was quietly scaled down. Everyone seemed ready to accept it was a tragic accident, that she slipped and fell. But I couldn't. I replayed every moment from the night before, every word she'd said. Nothing hinted at her being upset. Nothing suggested she might hurt herself. And most importantly, Alina hated those cliffs. She always mentioned how unstable they looked, how the wind made her nervous up there. I'd once joked that she should run on the beach instead. She laughed, but she didn't disagree. So why would she go so close to the edge? As the days turned into weeks, I felt isolated. People looked at me with pity, but no one really listened. When I told the police that she wouldn't have gone near the edge, they nodded and made notes but didn't follow up. I started questioning my own thoughts. Was I overthinking it? Seeing patterns where there were none? Or was something far more sinister going on that no one else seemed to notice? I kept coming back to one simple truth. Alina didn't fall. She didn't leave town. She didn't run away. Someone made her disappear, and I was going to find out who. It was late one afternoon when I stumbled across the box. The kind of discovery that starts with something ordinary. A simple decision to clean out the storage space beneath the floorboards. I wasn't looking for anything, just trying to distract myself. Grief had turned into frustration, and frustration had turned into obsession. Every time I entered the apartment, I felt like I was being watched, not by someone outside, but by the silence inside those walls. Something felt unfinished. The crawl space beneath our apartment was small and dusty, mostly used to store things we never touched. Old shoes, boxes of decorations, winter coats. As I moved things around, my hand brushed against a wooden panel that felt loose. Curious, I tugged on it, and it came away with a soft crack. Behind it was a small cavity, and inside it sat a locked wooden box. It was heavy, sealed with a rusted latch, My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Back in the apartment, I used a hammer to break the lock. It popped open with a reluctant snap, as if it had been waiting for someone to open it for years. What I found inside stopped my heart. There were photographs, dozens of them. They were all of women, most of them strangers, and all the photos were taken from a distance like surveillance shots. They showed women walking down streets, getting into cars, entering buildings. Some were nighttime shots, others in daylight. None of them looked posed. They didn't know they were being watched. Each photo had a name and a date written on the back in neat, precise handwriting. Some of the dates went back several years. Others were recent. One of the last photos in the stack was of Alina. My chest tightened. The photo showed her jogging near the cliffs, taken from behind, just before sunrise. It was dated 2 days before she vanished. At the bottom of the box was a small flash drive. I hesitated before plugging it into my laptop. Part of me didn't want to know what was on it, but I had come too far to stop. The files it contained were short video clips. The footage was grainy and silent, clearly taken from hidden cameras. And just like the photos, it was all of women, being followed, entering their homes, going about their routines. One clip was of Alina, filmed from across the street as she walked home one evening. Another was of a woman I didn't recognize, standing in a grocery store aisle looking over her shoulder nervously. I sat frozen in front of the screen, unable to move. Whoever had taken these had been watching for a long time. They knew routines, schedules, habits. This wasn't random, it was targeted. I knew I had to go to the police, but I couldn't. The box had been hidden in our apartment, in our crawl space. How could I explain that? Would they believe I found it by accident, or would I become a suspect? In that moment, I realized I was completely alone, and someone out there was watching. I couldn't sleep after finding the box. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a footstep. Every car that passed the window felt like someone coming for me. I kept the flash drive in my pillowcase as if proximity would keep me safe. I stopped answering calls. I barely ate, but I couldn't stop thinking. The photos, the videos, they meant someone had been documenting women for years, maybe longer. I was convinced that whoever took them had something to do with Alina's disappearance. I needed answers, and my mind kept circling back to the man who rented the tool shed behind our building. He was quiet, always kept to himself. He paid his rent in cash and never spoke to anyone unless he had to. I'd seen him only a few times in the year we'd lived there. Older, maybe mid-50s. Greasy baseball cap, stained jeans, the kind of person no one pays attention to. He claimed to be a handyman, storing tools and scrap materials, but no one ever saw him doing any actual work. The shed door was always locked. The windows were covered with newspaper. I started watching the shed. I sat by the window for hours, notebook in hand, tracking the times he came and went. He had no consistent pattern. Sometimes he'd be gone for days. Other times he'd come and go twice in an hour. That randomness made it worse. One night, after watching him leave with his backpack slung low, I made my move. I waited 30 minutes to be sure he wasn't coming back. My hands shook as I picked the lock with a bobby pin and an old knife I found in the kitchen. It took longer than I expected, and for a moment I thought I wouldn't get in. But then it clicked. Inside, the shed was cold and smelled like dust and chemicals. It wasn't full of tools. It was filled with cabinets, file boxes, and a strange tangle of wires. An old desk sat in the corner, covered with maps and photos. There were more pictures, so many more. Women I didn't know. Women who had probably never even noticed someone was following them. There were files, neatly labeled with names and dates. Some of the names matched those I had seen on the photos in the box. Some I remembered from local news stories. People who had gone missing, whose cases had quietly gone cold. I found a detailed map of the surrounding area with red dots marked in the woods, by the cliffs, near abandoned buildings. There were notes, coordinates, and hand-drawn diagrams. And there was one last thing, a file marked with Alina's name. Inside it were more pictures of her, not just from when she jogged, but from inside our apartment. Shots of her cooking, sitting on the couch, sleeping. I dropped the file and backed out of the shed, heart pounding, bile rising. Alina hadn't just been watched. She had been studied, hunted. And I was starting to think I might be next. It had been a week since I broke into the shed, and every day since had felt like a countdown. I couldn't unsee what I'd found. Couldn't stop imagining Alina's final moments, or the possibility that the man might already be watching someone else. Maybe even me. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't gone to the police. I still couldn't. The shed was on our property. The evidence in that box had been hidden beneath my own floorboards. If I came forward now, there was no guarantee I wouldn't be implicated. So I kept the secret and tried to return to my routine. I failed. My nerves were frayed. I started checking the locks on the doors twice, 3 times before bed. I kept the curtains drawn at all hours. I jumped at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I couldn't focus at work and called in sick more than once. But the worst part wasn't fear. It was the sense that someone was always just outside my line of sight. Watching. Waiting. That was when the envelope arrived. It was in my mailbox one morning, nestled between a pizza flyer and a utility bill. No return address. My first name was written on the front in shaky, uneven handwriting. Something about the way the letters slanted made my stomach turn. I carried it back upstairs slowly, almost afraid to touch it. Inside there was no letter, just a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken the night before through my bedroom window. I was standing by my dresser, changing clothes. My blinds had been slightly open. I hadn't even realized. My face was turned slightly away, but it was unmistakably me. Taped to the back of the photo was a small folded piece of paper. One sentence had been printed in neat capital letters with what looked like a typewriter. It read, "You're looking too hard." I dropped the envelope and backed away from it like it might burn me. My breath came in short gasps. Someone had been there outside my window watching me in the dark. They knew I had gone into the shed. They knew I had the box. They knew I was digging. I didn't stay that night. I packed a small duffel bag, only essentials, and left the apartment without turning off the lights. I didn't have a plan. I drove aimlessly for hours before pulling into a cheap motel 2 towns over. I used cash and didn't give my real name. I couldn't risk being found. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together a plan. I looked into missing persons cases. I reviewed everything from the box again, this time with fresh eyes. But my focus was broken. I was spiraling. Every knock on the wall, every voice outside the motel room made me freeze. I was unraveling. Then the news broke. The man from the shed had been arrested in another town. Not for murder, not for stalking. For possession of illegal surveillance equipment. He made bail, and then, just like Alina, he vanished. Years have passed since then. I've moved far away from that coastal town. New city, new job, new name. I don't speak to anyone from that time in my life anymore. I got married to someone kind. Someone who sees me as stable, put together. He knows I lived somewhere else before we met, but he doesn't know the truth. Not really. He's never asked why I flinch when a camera flashes unexpectedly, or why I insist on sleeping with the curtains drawn and the windows locked tight. I let him believe it's just a quirk. There are no more boxes hidden under the floorboards. No strange envelopes, no more men in sheds, but the memory lingers like smoke. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night certain that someone is watching me through the window just like before. I know it's irrational, but the feeling doesn't go away. I don't talk about what happened. I tell myself that burying the truth was the safest choice. For me, for the life I've built. for the people I love. But I think about it more than I care to admit. The last thing I did before I left that town for good was destroy everything. I burned the photos, I smashed the flash drive, I ripped up the notes and maps. I even tore apart the wooden box and threw the splinters into a public dumpster across town. I didn't want a trace of it to follow me. If I was going to survive, I needed to pretend it never happened. I needed to become someone else entirely. But pretending doesn't erase the truth. The man who watched Alina and so many others was never found. After his release, he disappeared. Just like the women in those photos. Just like Alina. There were rumors, of course. People speculated. There were whispers online that he had operated under different identities in different towns, and that our town was just one stop along a long, hidden path of victims. But there was never any proof. The investigations dried up. The media lost interest. People moved on. I didn't. I still wonder if I could have done more. Maybe if I had gone to the police right away. Maybe if I hadn't destroyed the evidence. Maybe if I hadn't been so afraid. But fear was all I had. It guided every decision I made. And maybe that's what saved me. Or maybe it's what let him get away. This is the chapter of my life that no one knows about. It lives in shadows, tucked behind smiles and small talk. I've never said it out loud, not to my husband, not to a therapist, not even to myself in the mirror. Until now. This is the part of my story that I tried to forget. The part I hoped would never resurface. But some truths never stay buried. Some shadows never fade. And some chapters, no matter how hidden, are still part of the